Good evening, lovely listeners, and welcome to Chapter 3 of The Magician. Please get yourself comfortable, get your favourite cuppa, press pause, snuggle in, and then hit play. This evening we're starting with Chapter 3 called Keep. So here we go. We join Pug as he's sitting sulking on his sleeping pallet. Fantas the fire drake pushed his head forward, inviting Pug to scratch him behind his eye ridges. Seeing that he would get little satisfaction, the drake made his way to the tower window with a snort of displeasure, complete with a small puff of black smoke, launched himself into flight. Pug didn't notice the creatures leaving, so engrossed was he in his own world of troubles. Since he had taken on the position of Colgan's apprentice 14 months ago, everything he had done seemed to go wrong. He lay back on the pallet, covering his eyes with a forearm. He could smell the salty sea breeze that blew in through his window and feel the sun's warmth across his legs. Everything in his life had taken a turn for the better since his apprenticeship, except the single most important thing, his studies. For months, Colgan had been labouring to teach him the fundamentals of the magician arts, and that was always something that caused his efforts to go awry. In the theories of spellcasting, Pug was a quick study, grasping the basic concepts well, but each time he attempted to use his knowledge, something seemed to hold him back. It was as if a part of his mind refused to follow through with the magic, as if a block existed that prevented him from passing a certain point in the spell. Each time he tried, he could feel himself approach that point, and like a rider of a balky horse, he couldn't seem to force himself over the hurdle. Colgan dismissed his worries, saying that it would all sort itself out in time. The stout magician was always sympathetic with the boy, never reprimanding him for not doing better, for he knew the boy was trying. Pug was brought out of his reverie by someone's opening the door. Looking up, he saw Father Tully entering, a large book under his arm. The cleric's white robes rustled as he closed the door. Pug sat up. "Pug, it's time for your writing lesson." He stopped himself when he saw the downcast expression of the boy. "What's the matter, lad?" Pug had come to like the old priest of Astalon. He was a strict master, but a fair one. He would praise the boy for his success as often as scold him for his failures. He had a quick mind and a sense of humour, and was open to questions, no matter how stupid Pug thought they might sound. Coming to his feet, Pug sighed. "I don't know, Father. It's just that things don't seem to be going right. Everything I try, I manage to make a mess of." "Pug, it can't be all black," the priest said, placing a hand on Pug's shoulder. "Why don't you tell me what is troubling you, and we can practice writing some other time?" He moved to a stool by the window and adjusted his robes around him as he sat. As he placed the large book at his feet, he studied the boy. Pug had grown over the last year, but was still small. His shoulders were beginning to broaden a bit, and his face was showing signs of the man he would someday be. He was a dejected figure in his homespun tunic and trousers, his mood as grey as the material he wore. His room, which was usually neat and orderly, was a mess of scrolls and books reflecting the disorder in his mind. Pug sat quietly for a moment, but when the priest said nothing, it started to speak. "Do you remember my telling you that Colgan was trying to teach me the 3 basic cantrips to calm the mind so that the working of spells could be practiced without stress? Well, the truth is that I mastered those exercises months ago. I can bring my mind to a state of calm in moments now with little effort. But that is as far as it goes. After that, everything seems to fall apart." "What do you mean?" "The next thing to learn is to discipline the mind to do things that are not natural for it. such as think on one thing to the exclusion of everything else, or not to think of something, which is quite hard once you've been told what it is. I can do those things most of the time. But now and again, I feel like there are some forces inside my head crashing about, demanding that I do things in a different way. It's like there was something else happening in my head than what Colgan told me to expect. Each time I tried one of the simple spells Colgan has taught me, like making an object move or lifting myself off the ground, these things in my head come flooding in on my concentration and I lose my control. I can't even master the simplest spell. Pug felt himself tremble, for this was the first chance he had had to speak about this to anyone besides Colgan. Colgan simply says to keep at it and not worry. Nearing tears, he continued, I have talent. Colgan said he knew it from the start, first time we met, when I used the crystal. You've told me that I have talent, but I just can't make the spells work the way they're supposed to. I get so confused by it all. Pug, said the priest, magic has many properties, and we understand little of how it works, even those of us who practice it. In the temples we are taught that magic is a gift from the gods, and we accept that on faith. We do not understand how this can be so, but we do not question. Every order has its own province of magic, with no two quite alike. I am capable of magic that those who follow their orders are not, but none can say why. Magicians deal in a different sort of magic, and their practices are very different from our practices in the temples. Much of what they do we cannot. It is they who study the art of magic, seeking its nature and workings, but even they cannot explain how magic works. They only know how to work it and pass that knowledge along to their students, as Colgan is doing with you. Trying to do with me, Father. I think he may have misjudged me. I think not, Pug. I have some knowledge of these things, and since you've become Colgan's pupil, I have felt the power growing in you. Perhaps you will come to it late as others have, but I'm sure you will find the proper path. Pug was not comforted. He didn't question the priest's wisdom or his opinion, but he did feel that he could be mistaken. I hope you're right, Father. I just don't understand what's wrong with me. I think I know what's wrong, came a voice from the door. Startled Pug and Father Tully turned to see Colgan standing in the doorway. His blue eyes were set in lines of concern, and his thick grey brows formed a V over the bridge of his nose. Neither Pug nor Tully had heard the door open. Colgan hiked his long green robe and stepped into the room, leaving the door open. Come here, Pug, said the magician with a small wave of his hand. Pug went over to the magician, who placed both hands on his shoulders. Boys who sit in their rooms day after day worrying about why things don't work make things not work. I am giving you the day for yourself. As it is 6th day, there should be plenty of other boys to help you in whatever sort of trouble boys can find. He smiled, and his pupil was filled with relief. You need a rest from study. Now go. So saying, he fetched a playful cuff to the boy's head, sending him running down the stairs. Crossing over to the pallet, Colgan lowered his heavy frame to it and looked at the priest. Boys, said Colgan, shaking his head. Ye hold a festival, give them a badge of craft, and suddenly they expect to be men. But they're still boys, and no matter how hard they try, they still act like boys, not men. He took out his pipe and began filling it. Magicians are considered young and inexperienced at 30, but in all other crafts 30 would mark a man a journeyman or master, most likely readying his own son for the choosing. He put a taper to the coals still smouldering in Pug's firepot and lit his pipe. Tully nodded. I understand, Colgan. The priesthood also is an old man's calling. At Pug's age I still had 13 years of being an occult before me. The old priest leaned forward. Colgan, what of the boy's problem? The boy's right, you know, Colgan started flatly. There is no explanation for why he cannot perform the skills I've tried to teach. The things he can do with scrolls and devices amaze me. The boy has such gifts for these things. I would have wagered he had the makings of a magician of mighty arts, but this inability to use his inner powers. Do you think you can find a solution? I hope so. I would hate to have to release him from apprenticeship. It would go harder on him than had I never chosen him. His face showed genuine concern. It is confusing, Tully. I think you'll agree. He has the potential for a great talent. As soon as I saw him use the crystal in my hut that night, I knew for the first time in years I might have at last found my apprentice. When no master chose him, I knew fate had set our paths to cross. But there is something else inside that boy's head, something I've never met before, something powerful. I don't know what it is, Tully, but it rejects my exercises as if they were somehow not correct or ill-suited to him. I don't know if I can explain what I've encountered with Pug any better. There is no simple explanation for it. Have you thought about what the boy said? Asked the priest, a look of thoughtful concern on his face. You mean about my having been mistaken? Tully nodded. Colgan dismissed the question with a wave of his hand. Tully, you know as much about the nature of magic as I do, perhaps more. Your God is not called the God who brought order for nothing. Your sect unravelled much about what orders this universe. Do you for one moment doubt the boy has talent? Talent, no, but his ability is the question for the moment. Well put, as usual. Well then, have you any ideas? Should we make a cleric out of the boy, perhaps? Tully sat back, a disapproving expression upon his face. You know the priesthood is a calling, Colgan, he said stiffly. Put your back down, Tully. I was making a joke, he sighed. Still, if he hasn't the calling of a priest, nor the knack of a magician's craft, what can we make of this natural ability of his? Tully pondered the question in silence for a moment, then said, Have you thought of the lost art? Colgan's eyes widened. That old legend? Tully nodded. I doubt there is a magician alive who at one time or another hasn't reflected on the legend of the lost art. If it had existed, it would have explained away many of the shortcomings of our craft. Then he fixed Tully with a narrowed eye, showing his disapproval. But legends are common enough. Turn up any rock on the beach and you'll find one. I, for one, prefer to look for real answers to our shortcomings, not blame them on ancient superstitions. Tully's expression became stern and his tone scolding. We of the temple do not count it legend, Colgan. It is considered part of the revealed truth taught by the gods to the first men. Nettled by Tully's tone, Colgan snapped, So was the notion the world was flat until Roland Dirk, a magician, I'll remind you, sent his magic sight high enough to disclose the curvature of the horizon, clearly demonstrating the world to be a sphere. It was a fact known by almost every sailor and fisherman who'd ever seen a sail appear on the horizon before the rest of the ship since the beginning of time. His voice rose to a near shout. Seeing Tully was stung by the reference to ancient church canon long since abandoned, Colgan softened his tone. No disrespect to you, Tully, but don't try to teach an old thief to steal. I know your order chops logic with the best of them, and that half your brother clerics fall into laughing fits when they hear those deadly serious young occluts debate theological issues set aside a century ago. Besides which, isn't the legend of the lost art a Neshapian dogma? Now it was Tully's turn to fix Colgan with a disapproving eye. With a tone of amused exasperation, he said, Your education in religion is still lacking, Colgan, despite a somewhat unforgiving insight into the inner workings of my order. He smiled a little. You're right about the moot gospel courts, though. Most of us find them so amusing because we remember how painfully grim we were about them when we were acolytes. Then turning serious, he said, But I am serious when I say your education is lacking. The Ishapians have some strange beliefs, it's true, and they are an insular group, but they are also the oldest order known and are recognized as the senior church in questions pertaining to interdenominational differences. Religious wars, you mean, said Colgan with an amused snort. Tully ignored the comment. Their Shapians are caretakers for the oldest law and history in the kingdom, and they have the most extensive library in the kingdom. I have visited the library at their temple in Crondor, and it is most impressive. Colgan smiled, and with a slight tone of condescension said, As have I, Tully, and I have browsed the shelves at the Abbey of Sarth, which is 10 times as large. What's the point? Leaning forward, Tully said, The point is this. Say what you will about the Ashapians, but when they put forth something as history, not law, they can usually produce ancient tomes to support their claims. No, said Colgan, waving aside Tully's comments with a dismissive wave. I do not make light of your beliefs or any other man's, but I cannot accept this nonsense about lost arts. I might be willing to believe Pug could be somehow more attuned to some aspect of magic I'm ignorant of, perhaps something involving spirit conjuration or illusion. Areas I will happily admit I know little about. But I cannot accept that he will never learn to master his craft because the long-vanished god of magic died during the Chaos Wars. No, that there is unknown law, I accept. There are too many shortcomings in our craft even to begin to think our understanding of magic is remotely complete. But if Pug can't learn magic, it is only because I have failed as a teacher. Tully now glared at Colgan, suddenly aware the magician was not pondering Pug's possible shortcomings, but his own. Now you are being foolish. You are a gifted man, and were I to have been the one to discover Pug's talent, I could not imagine a better teacher to place him with than yourself. But there can be no failing if you do not know what he needs to be taught. Colgan began to sputter an objection, but Tully cut him off. No, let me continue. What we lack is understanding. You seem to forget there have been others like Pug, wild talents who could not master their gifts, others who failed as priests and magicians. Colgan puffed on his pipe, his brow knitted in concentration. Suddenly he began to chuckle, then laugh. Tully looked sharply at the magician. Colgan waved offhandedly with his pipe. I was just struck by the thought that should a swineherd fail to teach his son the family calling, he could blame it upon the demise of the gods of pigs. Tully's eyes went wide at the near blasphemous thought, then he too laughed, a short bark. That's one for the moot gospel courts. Both men laughed, a long, tension-releasing laugh. Tully sighed and stood up. He stretched, he yawned, and said, Still do not close your mind entirely to what I've said, Colgan. It may be Pug is one of those wild talents, and you may have to reconcile yourself for letting him go. Colgan shook his head sadly at the thought. I refuse to believe there is any simple explanation for those other failures, Tully, or for Pug's difficulties as well. The fault was in each man or woman, not in the nature of the universe. I have often felt where we fail with Pug is in understanding how to reach him. Perhaps I would be well advised to seek another master for him. Place him with one better able to harness his abilities. Tully sighed. I have spoken my mind of this question, Colgan. Other than what I've said, I cannot advise you. Still, as they say, a poor master's better than no master at all. How would the boy have fared if no one had chosen to teach him? Colgan bolted upright from his seat. What did you say? I said, how would the boy have fared if no one had chosen to teach him? Colgan's eyes seemed to lose focus as he stared into space. He began puffing furiously on his pipe. After watching a moment, Tully said, What is it, Colgan? Colgan said, I'm not sure, Tully. But you may have given me an idea. What sort of idea? Colgan waved off the question. I'm not entirely sure. Give me time to ponder. But consider your question and ask yourself this. How did the first magicians learn to use their power? Tully sat back down, and both men began to consider the question in silence. Through the window, they could hear the sound of boys at play, filling the courtyard of the keep. And that is where I am going to leave it tonight, lovely listeners. I hope you liked tonight's bedtime story. Tune in tomorrow for more of chapter 3. And I wish you a lovely evening and the sweetest of dreams. Good night.